Kalorama, a recorded books / Highbridge imprint, presents The Politics of Maps, Cartographic Constructions of Israel-Palestine by Christine Leuenberger and Itzhak Schnell. Read by Rachel Perry. Forward. How is it that an Israeli geographer and a Swiss-American sociologist and science studies scholar came together to write about the politics of maps in Israel? It all started with an email in 2005. At that time, I, Christine, asked then-graduate student Shay David whether he could assist me in finding Israeli academics interested in co-investigating the social consequences of the separation wall that the Israeli government had started to build in 2002. He connected me with Uri Gopher, who wrote to me on October 14. I am more than happy to assist you with your interesting and important research initiative, and proceeded to name Itzhak from the Department of Geography and the Human Environment at Tel Aviv University as a professor who is very keen to speak with you about this. By November 2nd, Itzhak and I were already brainstorming about what that joint project could be. Because of my ongoing teaching obligations and lack of funding, it was not until spring 2008, after I received a Fulbright Scholar Award, that I could spend a semester at Tel Aviv University. Upon my arrival in Tel Aviv, Itzhak became one of my most trusted informants, friends, and colleagues. As we traveled together across Israel and the West Bank, we kept talking about the history and geography of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It became increasingly clear to me that in order to fathom the complexity of the geography of the conflict, one had to walk the land and drive along and through it to fully appreciate the intermingling of Palestinian and Jewish Israeli spaces. Indeed, the embodied experience of being in these spaces of contention can provide a most vivid and vicarious understanding of this entrenched conflict over land, territory, and histories. Ethnographers have long maintained that having a trusted local mentor is the single most important aspect of doing fieldwork. Itzhak opened my eyes to the complexities of Israeli society in the midst of the continuously simmering Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The land and cityscapes became alive with the stories he told. The intricate social landscapes of Israeli society, its divisions and fissures, but also its unity and coherence became ever clearer to me as we were sipping coffees, walking along the barrier's route, and driving for hours through the plains and hills of Israel-Palestine. During those many hours, Itzhak would share his knowledge, stories, and experiences from having lived in a divided land all his life, and I was always eager to listen, to learn, and to understand what for me was uncharted territory. It was on one of our many walks to lunch in one of Tel Aviv University's cafeterias that we started talking about maps. There were many maps hanging on the walls of Tel Aviv's geography department. They all differed from one another, and I had become intrigued by their differences, by their textures, and by what they cartographically represented and excluded. Yet it was not until one day in May 2008 that I started to appreciate the power of the politics of maps. That day I was to meet Abir, a Palestinian journalist, who was to drive me into the West Bank to interview several Palestinian experts. She was to meet me outside the American Colony Hotel in East Jerusalem. Armed with an Israeli-produced Carta map of the West Bank, I was ready to trace our route through what for me was then still unknown territory. Abir skillfully navigated through a maze of streets, avoiding the many checkpoints into the West Bank, and drove through an unfinished section of the separation wall, crossing from a Jewish to a Palestinian neighborhood. There we were, in Palestine. Then, suddenly, Abir turned to me and explained that there had been a shooting at the notorious Kalandia checkpoint between Jerusalem and Ramallah, with people injured. My heart fell like a stone. Here I was in the West Bank, and things were heating up at the checkpoints. But Abir said, "Don't worry, we will stay out of the claws of the lion." I wasn't quite sure what she meant, but trusted that she knew how to avoid the hotspots. Yet my trust in her did not stop me from following our route on my Carta map that I had purchased in Tel Aviv. On this map, some of the roads were marked green, which in the map's key were described as safe roads for Israeli drivers. Others were marked red, apparently to be avoided by Israeli drivers. Yet, as we were driving down a winding, badly maintained road, I suddenly could no longer match our location to the map at all. Slightly panicked, not least because we were to stay out of the tiger's claws, I tried, for what seemed like a rather long time, to trace our location. Finally, I plugged up the courage to tell Abir, "I cannot find where we are on the map anymore." She looked at me and laughed. "What is this map you have there?" "Oh, a Carta map. No wonder. We came off that map a long time ago." Not only was I now in unknown territory, but we had also just fallen off the map. I wondered, how could we have just fallen off the map? Why were Israeli infrastructures in the West Bank overrepresented, while Palestinian roads, towns, and villages were underrepresented or eliminated from the map? The reasons for our falling off the map that day was to preoccupy me for the next few years. It was on one of my and Itzhak's many walks to one of Tel Aviv University's cafeterias that Itzhak told me the story of how he also had become fascinated by the politics of maps. As he recounted, it was 2005 and an Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip was imminent. So he will pick up the story from here. With public debate over the move raging, I, Itzhak, as a member of the Israeli non-governmental organization, NGO, Peace Now, which advocates a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, was tasked to produce a set of maps. After the then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon had suggested a possible Israeli withdrawal from Gaza and Jericho, Peace Now conducted a survey to learn Israeli settlers' possible response to a withdrawal. The data showed that to do so would not cause a widely feared civil war in Israel. The survey was of interest to the media, and I started to prepare 2 Geographic Information Systems, GIS, maps, visualizing the data. The maps showed 3 different possible responses by the settlers to a withdrawal: acceptance of compensation for withdrawal, opposition, or outright violence. While working on these maps, I discovered that someone had broken into my office and stolen some of my computer disks. I did not connect this incident to the fact that I had been commissioned to produce these contentious and politically sensitive maps until a few days later, when my computer used to design the maps was also stolen. At the time, journalists and settler advocates contacted me, demanding access to the information ahead of publication. The survey and the maps were eventually published in one of Israel's most influential newspaper, Haaretz. A few weeks later, I was invited to give a lecture to veteran military officers who referred me to the head of the Council for National Security, which was planning the withdrawal from Gaza and Jericho. After my presentation to the council, I was told that the withdrawal could not be planned based on the map's apparently overly optimistic assumptions. Yet, the withdrawal took place nevertheless. The maps had become part of the public debate and the political decision-making at the time. However, the map thieves were never caught. Strangely, I felt weirdly pleased that after years of conducting academic research, my work had suddenly seemed important enough to be stolen. It was then that I started to appreciate the political power of maps. Years later, in 2010, I was asked by the Steinmetz Center for Peace Studies at Tel Aviv University to propose a conference that connects geography to peace research. At that time, Christine and I had just started to publish our first results on the politics of maps in Israel. After having long been neglected by geographers, political aspects of maps had started to gain attention. This conference provided a forum for Israeli scholars and cartographers to systematically and critically question the politics of maps in Israel for the first time. So, this is how our, Christine's and Itzhak's, shared story began. While it is a common assumption that scientific collaborations and projects are well-planned and motivated by the most pressing problems of the day, our long-term collaboration exemplifies what other researchers have often found: the importance of circumstantial factors, lack of planning, and the power of serendipity. Indeed, this project started off with an unexpected email in 2005. At that time, we had planned to work on walls and barriers, but after we both had become fascinated and deeply troubled by maps in different ways, we ended up working on maps. We started to collect maps, poring over them and trying to decipher differences of representational strategies between them. We had found our shared passion and interest. It was not walls, but it was space and the politics of maps. Yet we knew that whether writing about walls or maps in Israel-Palestine, doing so would be like walking through a political minefield. Indeed, it is astonishing that, when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, most everyone seems to feel entitled to have very strong opinions on the matter. Protagonists readily pass judgments on either side and show their partisan support based on often little or misleading information. Moreover, the politics surrounding the conflict has become so taken for granted, polarized, and hardened that it is virtually impossible to approach issues apart from their political fossilization. This book aims not to grind an evaluative axe, but to provide what anthropologist Clifford Geertz called a thick description by uncovering social processes shaping knowledge claims and describing and understanding actions, motives, and histories in their respective social, political, and cultural context. 1. Why Maps Matter. Introduction. Maps are ubiquitous. Climate maps inform us of weather patterns. Political maps designate nations, boundaries, and state capitals. Economic maps reveal a region's natural resources and economic activities. During presidential elections in the United States, maps delineate blue Democratic and red Republican states. Maps, whether they depict weather patterns, national boundaries, or election results, help us understand and navigate the world around us. Maps don't just come on paper, they also come with iPhone applications. Drivers increasingly rely solely on global positioning systems, GPS, to get to their destinations. Online software, such as Google Earth, depicts spatial configurations and provides satellite images of most localities. Geographic information systems, GIS, such as ArcGIS, ArcView, and Manifold, enable scholars, laypeople, and policymakers to design geographic, thematic, or analytic maps and visualize data cartographically. Moreover, mapping software and phone apps are providing the forum for various stakeholders and interest groups to engage in app-based activism, using maps as visual tools to persuade and appeal to wider publics and disseminate geopolitical visions. Historically, however, maps were the purview of a trained cadre of experts and surveyors that were in the service of the powerful, feudal lords, royalty, and nation-states. Indeed, it was with the rise of nation-states in the 17th century that maps, which represent calculable spatial relations within a given territory, became tools to control territories, allocate property rights, serve military needs, and consolidate state power. Maps were powerful because putting the state on the map meant knowing and imagining it as real, and so making it a reality. Maps helped create nations, boundaries, spatial imaginations, and national identities. In the latter part of the 20th century, however, map-making became transformed from an expert's endeavor into a people's cartography. The collection of spatial data and the business of map-making has become, more than ever, available to anyone with a home computer and an internet connection. web-based software, ranging from collaborative mapping projects to open-source mapping applications to Google Map Maker, allows users to make their own maps, gather data, and integrate them into different cartographic layers so as to disseminate alternative mappings and circulate counter-mapping and counter-knowledges. Such unprecedented access to map-making technologies provides new forums for political action and for shaping geopolitical visions. The Internet in particular has become a site for various social groups and grassroots movements to disseminate alternative mappings. For instance, the non-governmental organization NGO Americans for Peace Now has developed an application downloadable to iPhones that consists of Jewish settlements on a scalable Google-built map of the West Bank and Jerusalem. The aim is to disseminate information about the spread of illegal Jewish settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories, OPT, and to pressure Israel to halt settlements construction. Also, a My Palestine app pinpoints Palestinian heritage sites and raises awareness of the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories. App stores are therefore increasingly becoming a new battleground over contested territories. Such maps frequently challenge officially produced maps by states, providing countermaps, bottom-up maps, and resistance maps that challenge the traditional wisdom and reveal the silences and omissions that are an inevitable part of maps made in the service of a state. In such an environment, where user-defined maps are increasingly prevalent, it is particularly important to investigate how maps may serve as rhetorical tools to advocate for particular socially constructed, value-laden, and ideologically charged geopolitical visions. Maps produced in a conflict region, like Israel-Palestine, provide an exemplary case study of alternative mapping practices. This region tells a rich story about the interlinkages between maps and politics. It is a place where territories and boundaries, as well as nation and statehood, remain contested. For instance, since the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, neighboring countries have disputed its territorial status and legitimacy. Similarly, Israel's declaration of Jerusalem as its capital is not internationally recognized as, according to international law, East Jerusalem is considered to be under Israeli occupation. While differences about the contours of the national territory have remained latent pre-1967 within Israel, that unanimity evaporated after the 1967 war between Israel and its neighboring states of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. At that time, Israel more than tripled the territory under its control, as it occupied territories formerly controlled by Jordan, West Bank and East Jerusalem, Egypt, Gaza, the Sinai Peninsula, and Syria, Golan Heights, producing controversies about Israeli territorial claims within as well as outside Israel-Palestine. The aftermath of the 1967 war also strengthened the political consciousness of Palestinians living in Israel, as well as under Israeli occupation in the West Bank and Gaza, and in the diaspora, and it gave rise to a neo-Zionist national movement within Israel and the Jewish diaspora that aimed to recover the whole land of Israel, a biblical Palestine on both sides of the Jordan River. The legal territorial quandary post-1967 only intensified the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The location of boundaries and the territorial status of Israel and the Palestinian territories became increasingly a matter of public debate, and maps became an integral part of it. Whether we look at maps produced by the Israeli state or by various governmental or non-governmental organizations or interest groups, they always incorporate and represent wider discourses within Israeli society. Organizations ranging from what in Israel are considered leftist human rights and peace groups to social advocacy groups and political parties associated with the Israeli right have produced an array of different maps of Israel-Palestine. These maps communicate different narratives, including concerns about Israel's national security and demography, its occupational strategies in the Palestinian territories, its borders compliance or non-compliance with international law, and claims pertaining to Jewish rootedness in Greater Israel. the area that constituted Palestine prior to the establishment of the Emirate of Jordan in 1922. Palestinian cartographers also used maps with the aim of facilitating the building of a nation-state of Palestine. Various Palestinian mapping genres also reflect mapmakers' concern with the Israeli occupation and the concomitant territorial annexation of Palestinian lands, the infringement of international law by the Israeli state, as well as Palestinians' rootedness in the land and their territorial displacement. Various state and non-state Israeli and Palestinian actors therefore use an array of cartographic strategies to relay these concerns and thereby reflect the politics of maps in societies in intractable conflict. Understanding maps, theories and methods. Work in critical cartography has long interrogated maps as representations and has pointed to links between maps and politics. For instance, all maps involve distortion by projecting a three-dimensional curved globe onto a two-dimensional flat surface. Besides selecting a projection, mapmakers also have a choice as to how to construct a map's content. For instance, according to the rule of ethnocentricity, societies tend to place their own territory at the center of the world map. Also, the intended audience of a map can co-determine what is included or excluded. During South Africa's apartheid regime, maps tended to foreground white settlements and ignore or minimize black townships, as the map's target audience was white settlers. Maps are thus designed for certain audiences, and they communicate particular social, cultural, and political assumptions and preferences. While geographers traditionally differentiated between scientific and political propaganda maps, John Pickles argues that to do so has become obsolete. Indeed, not only do all maps communicate social, cultural, and political assumptions and preferences, but they also can become tools to shape, legitimize, and institutionalize certain forms of knowledge and collective spatial imaginations. Historically, national movements and states have always used various types of maps to consolidate national images that facilitated the hegemony of the nation-state and helped shape collective spatial imaginations. For instance, national maps, irrespective of whether they stress or omit cartographic details, tend to emphasize borders, turning the territorial shape into a recognizable logo, which can help create the imagined community of a nation. Maps can also depict patterns of control and preferred national boundaries, emphasize potential threats and political disputes, and stimulate socio-political action. Such political and social concerns shape the map's hierarchization of spaces. They impact the visual and linguistic information that is included or omitted, such as the size, color, and symbols, as well as the names and narratives incorporated. In the process of mapping, landscapes are thereby reconstituted as socially meaningful signs, subject to selection, classification, abstraction, scale, and simplification. Therefore, the truth of a landscape is not revealed once social and political factors distorting cartographic representations are eliminated. Rather, maps do not reveal, but produce reality. They do not represent, but become inscribed in the landscape. They are not fixed, but are continuously made and remade. This entails a shift from ontology, how things are, to ontogenesis, how things become, from secure representation to unfolding practice. The focus on the practice of mapping reveals that all maps are necessarily selective, contingent, and contextual to solve relational spatial problems. This shift in critical cartography from understanding maps not as secure representations, but as constituted by textual and cartographic practices that are inevitably selective, informed by particular social and historical contexts, and shaped by their function and audience, provides us with conceptual tools for interpreting maps. Critical cartography's focus on the context and practice of mapping also speaks to science studies' commitment to studying science in context. Science studies scholars focus on the political, social, cultural, and institutional factors that impact the sciences. one of the hallmarks of science studies has been the study of scientific controversy, the real-time process in which knowledge is constituted while being as yet unfinished. Focusing on controversy has become an analytical way to contextualize knowledge claims and gain unique insight into the production of knowledge and the politics of science. Arguably, the geography and cartography of Israel-Palestine is an ideal laboratory for science studies. Map-making in this region is a controversy in the making, as Israel's national borders continue to be disputed, and Israeli, Palestinian, and internationally produced maps depict the region differently. The history of mapping Israel-Palestine also speaks to how the sciences have become an integral part of nation-state building in the 20th century, and thereby this study contributes to science studies literature on the co-production of science and the state. Furthermore, the turn to the rhetoric of inquiry in science studies points to the importance of language and rhetoric in the sciences. Indeed, as Nelson and others note, facts themselves are mute. Whatever the facts, we do the speaking, whether through them or for them. Scientists, therefore, necessarily use rhetoric to construct the objectivity of their findings, invoke the authority of their expertise, and use analogies and metaphors to communicate effectively. Arguably, cartographers also necessarily use visual forms of rhetoric to do so. How they use various textual and visual rhetorical devices to do so is the subject of our analysis. While geographers, critical cartographers, and science studies scholars have analyzed the visual content of maps, methodologically comprehensive and theoretically grounded rhetorical close reading of maps are limited. Only more recently has academic attention started to focus on how visual and textual devices inform images and communicate certain social, cultural, and political messages. However, despite the importance of empirically analyzing the role, function, and power of visual and textual devices in maps, there still is a lack of a coherent methodological and theoretical framework that can provide an understanding of the content and function of maps. Arguably, linking the conceptual frameworks of science studies and critical cartography provides a theoretically rich and empirically sensitive framework in order to better understand the politics of maps, as it enables us to focus on both the macro domain of politics, culture, and state-making, and the micro-politics of making maps in practice. In order to tell the story of the politics of maps in Israel-Palestine, we relied on various qualitative methodologies. The data include contemporary and historical cartographic material collected from archival, library, and commercial sources, the Internet, the news media, and various governmental and non-governmental organizations and political interest groups. We present various maps from the 1920s to the present that represent a certain generic style of map making during different historical periods. We also conducted numerous in-depth qualitative interviews with map makers from governmental and non-governmental organizations, academia, and various political advocacy groups who produce maps for political, academic, or commercial purposes and audiences. Interviews were conducted with various stakeholders from Israeli governmental and non-governmental institutions, ranging from the Survey of Israel to NGOs, including B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories, the Geneva Initiative, Zohot, in Hebrew, Remembering, and the Israeli political party Tafnit and the Jabotinsky Institute. Interviews with Israeli academics were also conducted at Beersheva University, Tel Aviv University, Bar Ilan University, and Hebrew University, among others. Interviewees from international organizations included leaders of mapping projects funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, Middle East experts from the International Crisis Group, and various United Nations, UN-affiliated cartographers and planners from the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, UN-OCHA, and United Nations Development Program, UNDP, among others. Palestinian interviewees were affiliated with a range of institutions such as the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, Negotiations Affairs Department, the Palestinian National Authority, PNA's, Ministry of Transport and Ministry of Tourism, the Palestinian Legislative Council, and various municipalities throughout the Palestinian territories. Interviews were also...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?